We continue with the content of episode 7 of The Last of Us. In the previous episode, Joel was seriously injured, and while escaping, he passed out due to excessive blood loss. Ellie struggled to drag him into a nearby small cabin. The traces left along the way are too obvious, and if there are pursuers, they will quickly find them. Joel, enduring the intense pain, urges Ellie to leave quickly. Seeing that the Ellie is indifferent, he pushes her away. Now is not the time for sentimentality. Ellie also understands this truth in her heart. After a deep look at Joel, she resolutely turns and walks towards the door. But when she touches the doorknob, a long-forgotten memory rushes into her mind. Ellie, from 6 months ago, was still a trainee soldier inside the quarantine zone, accompanied by many young orphans. Suddenly, a girl snatched Ellie's earphones. Ellie, already with a fiery temper, directly threw a punch. As a result, Ellie's left eye was bruised, and the girl's face received 15 stitches. The instructor in charge of training was quite helpless. Ellie had been in solitary confinement 3 times this month. He didn't want to continue the previous approach. Trainees like Ellie only had 2 paths in the future. Those who performed poorly would become ordinary soldiers, repeating the monotonous patrol work every day. Maybe one day, they would be shot by the Fireflies. Only those who followed the rules could become officers, living an unimaginably comfortable life. They could even casually discipline anyone. Ellie chose to become an officer without hesitation. This time, there was no punishment. She even returned the confiscated Walkman to her. After experiencing this incident, she decided to be a good girl who followed the rules. She turned off the lights promptly at bedtime. In the middle of the night, a figure quietly climbed in through the window. Alert, Ellie swiftly pushed the person down. After a calm look, it turned out to be Riley, who had been missing for a month. Ellie's heart was full of resentment. Riley remained silent. After a while, she suddenly said she joined the Fireflies. Ellie was instantly shocked. Since childhood, she had been taught by instructors that the Fireflies organization is the root of the turmoil. Riley didn't defend herself. Instead, she mysteriously expressed that she wanted to spend the most wonderful night of her life with Ellie. Although Ellie was angry, out of trust in her friend, she quickly changed her clothes and followed her quietly to the street through the window. The quarantine zone has always been under curfew. The 2 girls evade guards, walking towards the darkness. After reaching an abandoned house, the 2 skillfully climbed in. Ellie was very curious about where they were going, but Riley kept shaking her head and refused to answer. Keeping it mysterious can bring surprises. In an instant, the 2 arrived at a corridor. There was a corpse lying on the floor ahead. Ellie boldly walked over to examine it carefully, speculating that the person might have taken pills while drinking and quietly died here. Her heart was calm, and she even put away the unfinished drink. Suddenly, a loud noise. The corpse fell through the decaying floor with a crack. The 2, frightened, quickly drank some alcohol to calm down. Ellie wanted to touch Riley's issue pistol. She always held some hostility towards the Fireflies organization. Several conflicts of firepower in the quarantine zone were all initiated by them. Riley became somewhat silent. A month ago, when she came out for a stroll at night, she accidentally encountered Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies. Marlene's narrative touched her deeply. As they chatted, they crossed one rooftop after another, finally arriving in front of a huge building. Ellie was somewhat surprised. This is a shopping mall designated as a restricted area by the Relief Bureau. Riley smiled and nodded. Then with Ellie, she infiltrated the interior through a hole. Ellie curiously looked around. It was an ordinary power distribution room. Riley said with a smile that a surprise was about to come. Then she let Ellie pass through the door alone. Ellie felt a bit of anticipation. Soon, she passed through the door and arrived in a corridor, accompanied by the roar of the generator. A colorful shopping mall appeared before the girl. Ellie's heart was full of shock. She had never seen such a beautiful sight in her life. Her companion on the side was extremely pleased. Even more exciting things were yet to come. They came to an escalator. Ellie saw this thing for the first time. She happily played on the escalator alone.
This is so cool!
Riley, somewhat speechless, pulled her down. Don't waste too much time here. All around were shops that had not had time to close their doors, although the goods inside had been looted. Ellie could imagine how bustling it must have been before the apocalypse. As they walked, Riley suddenly stopped. Mysteriously, she asked Ellie to close her eyes. The little girl joyfully let the other lead her. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of a carousel. For something she had only seen in books, Ellie was curious and delighted. She even took out wine to celebrate, until her sense of novelty completely disappeared. Riley suddenly said with some seriousness, "The civilians in the quarantine zone, every day they can only do tedious work in exchange for limited survival supplies. And the purpose of the Fireflies organization is to overthrow the rule of the Relief Bureau and let all residents return to the life before the apocalypse." But Ellie still couldn't agree. When she grows up and becomes a manager, she can completely change everything. Riley smiled bitterly and shook her head. Last month, she just turned 17. But the task assigned by the instructors was to guard the sewer. She didn't want to shovel feces for the rest of her life, so she chose to leave the army and join the Fireflies organization. Ellie suddenly became somewhat silent. Maybe she was too naive. Some deep-rooted things were not so easy to break. Afterward, the 2 roamed the mall and experienced sticker photos, although the printed results were not great. When they arrived at an arcade, Ellie was even more stunned. Various game machines dazzled her. just as the two were playing without restraint. In the dark corner at the end of the corridor, an infected person woke up. Riley, somewhat excited, said it was time to move on. Who knew Ellie suddenly became silent? She had to return to the training camp for the sake of becoming a manager. She didn't want to miss the morning class. Riley did not stop her, but she prepared a gift. Ellie's eyes lit up. Following the other, she arrived at a bakery. It turned out to be Riley's usual residence. She took out an old, tattered book from her backpack. It was the second volume of Ellie's favorite riddle encyclopedia. Just then, Ellie saw a row of grenades on the shelf. These were weapons that harvested lives. Riley quickly explained that she would never use them on civilians. Ellie said, "Can a new recruit like you decide this?" Then she left angrily. Riley was somewhat anxious, quickly explaining that she would be sent to the quarantine zone in Atlanta, and today would be her last night here. Ellie's face became even darker. She couldn't understand why her best friend would abandon her without waiting for an explanation. She left angrily, but just as she walked out of the corridor, Ellie suddenly regained some sanity. She shouldn't part ways with her good friend like this. She turned around and walked back into the mall. Suddenly, from not far away, came the sound of screaming. Ellie, worried about her friend, couldn't help but speed up her pace until she approached the source of the sound. She realized it was just a toy that made noise. This was the last surprise prepared by Riley for her. Most of the resentment in Ellie's heart dissipated. It was only at this moment that Riley revealed the reason for leaving. She joined the Fireflies organization not long ago, but she genuinely felt the sense of family. This sense of belonging, accompanied by a great idea, made her unable to refuse any decision of the organization. Ellie didn't try to persuade her anymore. All she could offer now was her blessing. Riley's mood improved a lot at this moment. She decided to have one last celebration. With joyful music playing, the two put on quirky headgear and started dancing wildly on the counter. As the music gradually faded, Ellie looked at Riley with affection. Once again, she asked her to stay. Who knew Riley had just nodded in agreement. And suddenly, from outside, came the sound of infected. Both of them felt the danger approaching simultaneously. An infected rushed in. Riley fired, but didn't hit the vital spot. She could only run away madly with Ellie. The infected quickly caught up. Ellie immediately drew her knife and attacked the infected. Just as the infected was about to bite, Riley entangled the infected. Ellie seized the opportunity. She fiercely stabbed the infected in the head with the knife. The first successful kill of an infected. Ellie showed extreme excitement, but she quickly noticed something wrong with Riley's expression. It turned out her own arm had been bitten by the infected. Not only that, there was a deep scratch on Riley's hand. The two instantly became ashen-faced. Now, they only had two choices left. End themselves before turning into infected, which would be relatively painless. But Ellie chose the second option without hesitation. It's all over. Even if there were only 2 minutes left in life, she had to make an effort to persevere. After recalling everything, Ellie suddenly realized she couldn't abandon her companion anymore. The previous Ellie might have been powerless, but the current Gerald, no matter what, she had to fight for once. Quickly, Ellie found a roll of thread in a drawer. Ignoring Joel's eyes, a mix of reproach and relief, she began to stitch up his wound, one stitch at a time. Here is the end of episode 7 of The Last of Us. If you like our movie, please remember to subscribe or happy movie. See you in the next episode.